All right, welcome back to another episode of ICU Doc Talk. I have not done an episode in a while, so apologies about that. A lot of it has to do with, my time is limited. I enjoy talking and doing this podcast, but, and yeah, my time is limited, but honestly, sometimes I get bored talking to myself. And I'm like, I don't have anything to say. Nobody cares what, I don't. So, the reason I bring this up, if you haven't heard from me, if you like the podcast and you listen to it and you haven't heard from me in a while, just email me and be like, hey, talk about this. Because I can find, as you know, I can find little moments of time here and there. You know, if you give me an idea and it's like, it seems like I might have something to contribute to that idea, then I'm more likely to record a podcast and put it out there. Anyway, today I want to talk about patient anxiety and the patient experience in medicine, which is something that sometimes people that work in healthcare like discount. They don't care about. And there's a couple of reasons why. There's many reasons why patient experience is important. And what I mean by patient experience is how, as a patient navigates a healthcare system, what is their experience navigating that healthcare system? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it benign? Did they have a great time? Well, I don't know if anybody has a great time in a healthcare system, but are they positive about it? Are they negative about it? And what does their experience entail? Well, it's obviously working with staff. It's working with scheduling. There's many things that make up a patient experience. One of the reasons that it matters is that you don't want just the experience alone, right? It's not good for people to have bad experiences in medicine. You just, the virtue of you want someone to have a good experience as they're, right, getting therapy for whatever it is that they have, right? There's that alone. That's good. That's desirable. But then their experience with healthcare, how they interface with healthcare affects their health. It affects their future interfaces and their future, the way they talk with physicians or their healthcare providers. And it may even affect if they even come back to a hospital or if they even come back to a doctor. That is one of the reasons that it is so important to focus on patient experience. I don't care about, let me just make it clear, I do not care about, I don't know if I want to say I don't care about it, but there's these patient satisfaction surveys and stuff like that, and that's important and things like that. I'm not talking about this from an administrative standpoint, like a bean counter, like a bureaucrat being like, oh, this doctor got only rated 6 with their patients or something like that. Whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the actual patient experience and concern for their well-being and their health, and how if they have a negative experience, and there's many reasons you can have a negative experience, right? That it impacts their health, and that can impact their life, and that can impact how long they live, right? So it has tons of has a lot of consequences. So, and patient anxiety has a lot to do with that as well. So most people don't like, I don't know about most. Many people don't like to be in hospitals, don't like to go to the doctor, and there's many reasons for that, right? There's childhood trauma because someone forced them down and put a needle in them when they were 5, and they were totally traumatized by that for the rest of their lives, and they have needle phobia. Just the other day, there was a 70-year-old man, totally, with it guy, and he was like, and he was getting surgery, and he's like, I don't care about the surgery, whatever, I'm not afraid about that. He's like, I'm deathly afraid of getting an IV. And he's like, the reason is, I know, because he shared experience when he was young, and that his mom was crying or wasn't there or something. I'm kind of forgetting the details, but he had a childhood traumatic experience, and it completely affected his approach to, how he thinks about needles, and he has a phobia for it. And he was totally rational about it, right? He was like, I know it's a phobia. I know it's totally irrational, but it's just what it is. He's like, I pass out. I pass out every time, anytime someone tries to put a needle in me. And so I listen, and that's what I want to talk about, is the approach to patients like this. And I have a couple stories and stuff that I'll probably share. But with this guy, for example, I listened to him, and I was like, look, you can pass out. I'm like, you're in the pre-op area, and if you want to pass out, I was like, for one thing, I was like, I will put in your IV. Right? There's many people that put in IVs, and I'm not saying I'm like the best at putting in IVs, but there's like the pre-op nurse. There's many people that can put in IVs, but I'm his anesthesiologist, and I'm trying to foster trust with him in a short amount of time. And I was like, I will put in your IV right now. And I was like, you can pass out. I was like, I give you permission to pass out. That's fine, because he was afraid of passing out. I was like, you're in a safe, monitored area. I mean, we're looking at your vitals. And if you pass out, I was like, and I explained to him, it's something we call a vasovagal response, where your sympathetic response or your fight or flight response just goes a little haywire for a moment, and then you get the vagal response that puts the brakes on it, and that's why you pass out. And I'm like, it's brief, and it's actually not that big of a deal. Now, I'm totally saying this tongue in cheek. I know it's not within his power to like pass out, yay or nay. Like it's not a voluntary thing. But I think by saying it, it helped relax him, right? The stakes, it decreased the stakes for him. And I was like, it's fine, I'll pass out. I'm like, I'm going to bring a needle, I'll poke you. And I was like, do you want to know more information about it? Do you want to know what's going on as I'm doing it? Do you want me to talk to you about the needle, or do you want me to? And he was like, what? He's like, just don't tell me about it. Just tell me when it's done. So I was talking to him, and I put in the IV, and we were talking the whole time. And it was over. And he was like, oh. I was like, that's it. It's done. Like, let's go back to surgery. So doing that, it was not a lot of effort for me to do. Right? That's not a big deal. I think a lot of time a lot of healthcare workers and physicians are like, roll their eyes at patients that are, not all of them, of course. I'm like focusing on like the extreme. They roll their eyes like, oh, well, you just act like an adult. We don't want to do that. We do have to do this for kids. Are you a kid? Whatever. The extra effort that someone like me has to put in to make a patient like that feel better is minuscule. It's minuscule. It's nothing. It's nothing for me. And it's everything to them. Everything to them. They're some of the most grateful patients. When I'm done with surgery with them or whatever, I see them in the post-operative unit, someone that are like gushing with gratitude. It was just the tiny little things, the tiny little extra things that I did to make them feel heard, make them feel validated, and to go out of my way. Not even out of my way. Nothing. This isn't out of my way. This is routine care, customizing how you interact with patients. Anyway, they're the most grateful patients that I interact with, right? So here, let me tell you another story. So I had a patient who I did anesthesia for, and everything went fine. And then I get an email from like a quality control, whatever, like a patient complaint department, right? And the patient was very concerned about what happened to her under anesthesia, very, very concerned. And I got a call about this like a week later after it happened, and I was like, yeah, I do lots of anesthetics, right? Sometimes it's hard to remember everything that I do, but I brought up the patient's chart, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. And I'm like, and in my mind, and I haven't talked to the patient yet or anything, right? In my mind, I'm like, there was absolutely nothing wrong with anything that happened in this operation. It was all very routine, like totally routine. So I wasn't concerned from a standpoint of like, oh, I've done something wrong, or someone else in the room did something wrong. I wasn't concerned at the opposite, but I hadn't talked to the patient yet. Of course, I call the patient. That is what you must do. If you're ever in a position like mine, and you have a patient you're hearing that a patient is deeply concerned about something, you call them, you talk to them. And this isn't trying to avoid a lawsuit. I mean, I guess that's part of it, right? But I wasn't worried about that. Like, honestly, I was not worried about being sued or anything like that. I was concerned that I had heard through the complaint department that this woman was so concerned about what happened to her during anesthesia that she made a complaint about it. That's a big deal, right? For someone to go through that length, something happened. They had a really, really terrible experience. So I called her. And I was like, I was the anesthesiologist supervising your case. We met, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, I'm like, tell me about your experience. I don't remember. This was a while ago. This was years ago. So I don't quite remember. And I've had many conversations like this, right? This isn't the only time I've called a patient afterwards that was concerned about something that happened to them. This happened so many times. Anyway, so she, what had happened is there was and I can get into the details a little bit. There was a disconnect with what her experience was and what happened. Meaning her experience was kind of terrifying. And what it was is so when we send someone off to sleep, you put a mask over the mouth and nose with 100% oxygen. And when we put that on, she felt like she just couldn't breathe very well. And that is sometimes that's a common complaint. Sometimes when we put that mask on, there's sometimes people, whether it's them feeling claustrophobic or they just don't like how it feels. They don't feel like they're breathing very well, and it really terrified her. And it was totally routine what we had done. It was totally routine. And then I think as she was going off to sleep, there was like a tone of how someone said something or something like that kind of added to this fear complex that was being created in her mind. And I don't even know specifically what it was that concerned her, but she started to be like, she was scared as she was going to sleep that something was going wrong. Which what an awful experience for her to have. I know people can have that experience as they go off to sleep, and I try not to have, I try to do everything I can so people don't have that experience with it. They're terrified that they think something is going wrong as they're going off to sleep. Can you imagine that? And anyway, and then to a sugar on the top of her experience, she woke up and she had an IV in her foot, and that she couldn't handle that. She thought something went really wrong, like that she almost died because that she woke up with an IV in her foot, and that no one told her that she would have an IV in her foot. So I explained to her what happened. I explained to her, the process of undergoing anesthesia, and then I explained to her that as she went off to sleep, we needed to put another IV, and we tried on her hand. This is after she's asleep. We tried on her hands and her arms, and she was kind of a difficult stick, so we eventually just put one on her foot and then went on with the case, which is fairly routine. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you got to use a vein in someone's foot, and then once they're awake and done, you just take it out. So I had probably talked with her for about 45 minutes, and everything was fine. But it was just taking that extra time to understand her experience. And so imagine and she felt much better. Imagine I didn't have that conversation with her, and she was so terrified. And she literally, I forgot about this. She said she would, and I heard from the surgeon who did the case that she didn't want to ever have surgery or anesthesia ever again because of this experience, right? And that's exactly what I was talking about earlier in this podcast. So by talking to her, just taking some extra time, she felt much better about things. Like much better. Everything was totally resolved. So it's really, really important to engage in patients in an authentic way. Just be real with people. It's not the tone of voice that you use is so important. You don't use a tone of voice that you like you work in customer service. Talk to someone like they're sitting on your couch in your living room. And you're having a conversation with them. You just had them over for dinner, and now you're just having a chat. That is how you should talk to people. It's how you should talk to people in medicine. Because people, I've mentioned it before, they're really good at knowing when they're being like BS'd. When someone's just like trying to placate them and appease them and move on with their day. People are very good at that. You know when people are doing that with you, and patients know. They know it. They're very good at that. All right, now let's talk about I'm going to share a story that's different. I probably share. It's probably like my ego bias. I probably share stories that make me look good, right? But it's not like I don't do things perfectly all the time, right? Actually, okay. So I'm gonna share a story. Actually, I didn't do anything wrong in this story either. But let's just share. This is a different story, a different take. Okay. So I had this is when I was in the ICU, the cardiac ICU, and I had a patient who had some sort of cardiotomy, some sort of sternotomy, some surgery on their heart. I forget what it was. Anyway, so she was recovering. It was like post-op day 1. And the nurse comes talk to me and say, hey, I need to, this patient is very upset about their pain regimen, about what we're giving her for pain. I was like, okay. I'm like, that's an easy thing to talk about. I will give her, and in my mind, I'm like, I will give this patient whatever they want because they just had heart surgery and they're in pain. I'm like, this is a no-brainer. So I go on and talk to this patient. I was in there for an hour, probably. About at least 45 minutes to an hour. And this patient was so upset And it was so difficult to get to why she was upset. It was so extremely difficult to understand what was going on. And she wasn't like in a post-op daze or anything. She was with it. She wasn't like delirious or anything. And the details are so muddled to me right now because it was so convoluted. I still to this day don't understand what she was upset about. But she wanted some oxycodone, and I offered that, or maybe I don't even remember. Seriously, I don't even remember because it's such a blur because it was so confusing. And anything I said, just like to try to reconcile or to be like, yeah, we'll do that, she got so upset about. And I even said something. There was something I said that upset her so. Oh yeah. Okay, now I remember. I remember one of the main reasons she was upset. She was so terrified. She felt like the nurse had not come soon enough to give her pain medication, that she suffered in pain. And I definitely recognized that with her. I was like, and she said, I do not want to leave the ICU until my pain is totally controlled. And I was like, that's fine. We can keep you. I can keep you here even for another day to help with your pain control. And she was like, how can you guarantee me that when I'm on the floor, or like the surgical wards, that a nurse will come and give me pain medication, because they're even less responsive there because it's not the intensive care unit. And I was basically like, I was trying to be real with her, and I was like, I don't know if I can guarantee you that. And then I said something to the effect of like, you can't, I didn't say it like this, but this is how she heard it. Like, you can't stay in the ICU forever. I know I didn't say that, but that's what she felt. Right. Like, I'm pretty sure if you recorded this conversation, I don't think I said anything that would have been that upsetting to anybody, but she was very upset because she was in pain. She was suffering in pain, and she wasn't feeling heard. And that was causing even more trauma for her. And she was bawling. I mean, she was really upset and really crying. And I did not help at all. She was so angry with me. And she even said something like, I don't know what I had said to her is one of the worst things. I don't know. I was so blown away by this conversation because I could not, we were not communicating effectively. And she was so upset. And I was like, I'll keep you here for another day. I was like, I will make sure your pain is controlled before I send you out of the ICU. I promise you that. And she didn't believe me. And the damage was done. I mean, it was irreparable. And, so I think the point of sharing that story is there can be breakdown in communication despite your best efforts, and you're not always going to come off like you're a compassionate, caring individual. And there was total distrust with this patient the whole time she was in the ICU. And it was unfortunate because she became so hostile. I didn't even want to talk to her about her pain control anymore. And she almost kind of lost my my amiability and my friendliness, because I was like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I will come and treat you as a patient, but I going the extra effort and trying to console you and trying to understand you has only made things worse. So it was like demotivating to me. I don't really know what my point is here. I mean, I know it's sounding like I'm blaming the patient, and maybe I am a little bit. I don't know. You can email me. But it was very difficult conversation, and it was a very difficult time. And her pain was fine from my perspective. Maybe she was suffering from her perspective, and she did leave the ICU like a day later. And anyway, I guess my point is, despite your best efforts, you still can, through the patient's eyes, really fail at having them be heard and understood. And I really tried. I tried, but it just didn't work out. Now let's talk about preoperative pre-medication, anti-anxiety pre-medication. So I am liberal with it. I give it anytime anyone ever needs it. So people can hide their anxiety really well. Some people are really overt with their anxiety, like preoperative anxiety. They're very overt. Some people hide it really well. Like, they don't want you to know that they're anxious. Like, they're embarrassed by their anxiety. And I know that they are because, like, I'll go talk to them in the pre-op and they seem totally relaxed. Now, if I notice someone is a little nervous, and I think I've gotten good at recognizing anxiety in people. I am proactive. I don't say, I'm proactive. I don't wait for someone to ask for, so we give, in the United States, we give midazolam, which is a benzodiazepine, IV midazolam. It's also called Versed. I'll give that liberally preoperatively because it's a great medication. It gives, it hits the same receptors that alcohol hits. So it makes you feel loosey-goosey and relaxed. All those, those viral YouTube videos, a lot of them where people are like acting all drunk and stuff. It's probably, a lot of it times, it's probably benzo on board, like midazolam. But it makes you feel like a couple beers deep, makes you feel good. It also gives you anterograde amnesia, meaning once you give it, you often have memory loss while it's in your system, which is good. So you may not remember other events before you go off to sleep. So when I recognize anxiety in patients, I offer right away. I'm like, do you want something to relax you? I always offer that. And not everybody takes it. Some people do, some people don't. But sometimes if I don't see that, I don't automatically offer it to everybody. Now, if anybody asks, I always give it. That is my opinion. I have colleagues and people elsewhere that don't want to give it. They're like, oh, well, I've heard the reasoning, well, it can delay their discharge. My response to that is, so what? The patient experience matters. And for someone to be suffering with anxiety and on the verge of a panic attack before going to the operating room, you treat that. I don't care if it delays their recovery, waking up. I don't care. I don't care. Their experience matters way, way, way more than being delayed going home. Now, obviously, they need to be safely discharged. But my response to that is, I don't care. Their experience matters more than them occupying a bed in our recovery unit. Like, give me a break. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So the reason I know sometimes people hide their anxiety is like, I go talk to them and they're like, oh yeah, they're great. They're super chill. And I'm like, okay, they're fine. And then I bring them back to the operating room and I'm about to send them off to sleep and they're a wreck and their heart rate is like 120. Like they're just super, super anxious. I'm like, whoa, they were really anxious this whole time and I had no idea. And that happens all the time. I'm just like, wow, I didn't know. But I offer upfront freely when I detect that anxiety in people because I don't want people to be a wreck before going into surgery. It matters. The patient experience, my point of this podcast is patient experience matters. Their experience that they're having matters. It matters to them, right? Because anxiety is a form of suffering. So it matters to that person. And then it matters to their longitudinal care, for them coming back for a surgery, coming back to seek medical care. You want patients to have as good of an experience as possible for their benefit. I'm not saying like being in the hospital is good all the time, whatever, but if someone has ongoing chronic disease, chronic illnesses, they need surgery, they need medical care, whatever it is, they need to seek medical care. They need to feel comfortable. They need to feel heard. They need to feel like they're in a medical community that they trust. So important. Oh my gosh, that's so important. Do you know how many times I open up a patient's chart who's getting surgery and they're like 65 or whatever, and they have no medical history? And, someone's first conclusion could be like, oh, wow, they're healthy. No. It's because they haven't sought medical care their entire lives. And they probably have ongoing undiagnosed medical problems like coronary artery disease or peripheral artery disease or diabetes, and they just don't seek medical care. That is probably more likely what's going on. Why has that person not sought medical care their entire lives? The reasons are legion, right? There's many, 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 many reasons people do not seek medical care. One of them being cost. One of them not being insured. And another one could be not having trust and having anxiety, having trauma, having a phobia as a child. Just one meaningful and interaction with anybody, with you right now, if you're a healthcare worker, just that one interaction. Say you draw blood, right, in phlebotomy in a lab draw, and a patient comes in and you're just awesome with them, and you care about their experience, right? Just getting a blood draw, right? That's a huge deal for a lot of people. Just getting a blood draw, just coming in, getting some blood drawn, and leaving as an outpatient. That is a huge deal for many people. Having that needle enter their body and then watching blood come out. Whoa, that could be an unbelievable deal. So that one person, that phlebotomist who's taking that blood, just going a little extra mile. It's not even an extra mile, right? It's just doing a tiny little thing, just being a little more friendly, being a little more understanding, have a little more, your tone matters, not being condescending, being understanding, and trying to make them as comfortable, asking them questions, open-ended, trying to make them hurt. Like that one interaction that could be like, well, maybe that wasn't so bad. Okay, maybe I'll go back to my primary care after I get the results. These things matter. I know they do. They matter for people. I know they do. It's very important what I'm talking about, I think. Now, just for a minute, let's talk about children, pediatrics. So I don't do pediatrics, but often, very rarely do I do pediatric anesthesia. I don't do any pediatric critical care. And So for those that are not familiar, so for with little children, when say they need to come in electively for an operation, we do, and to put them down to sleep for surgery. So, okay, for an adult, you put it in an IV, right, and then preoperatively. And then you bring them back to the operating room and you send them off to sleep with usually propofol or some other sedative through their IV to send them off to sleep for an adult. But children don't like needles, right? Like they don't do well. Usually they don't do well with putting in an IV. So instead, as a routine, we, like a standard, we do a gas induction, meaning we bring the child back to the operating room and we put a mask over their mouth and nose, and we start a volatile anesthetic, a gas, which smells bad, right? Which smells like, I don't know, nail polish, worse than nail polish. And we usually put like a flavor in the mask, like some oil, like a bubble gum and blueberry, whatever. We have the child pick what flavor they want, and then they breathe that gas in, and then that's how they fall asleep. And then we put in an IV, and then put in a breathing tube, all that stuff. So that's routine for children. It's called a gas induction rather than an IV induction of anesthesia. So for this, this is still a distressing thing for many children, right? Think about a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old coming back into an operating room, and then strangers who have masks on, right? Because we have masks on in the operating room, and when we have sterile equipment that's open, we have masks on. So they come into this room, this cold room that's totally foreign, and a bunch of strangers with scrubs and masks on put a plastic mask over their mouth and gas them down, right? This is still a very highly potentially traumatic experience, right, for a child. And not always, right? Sometimes it goes just fine. So it all depends on the child. And so there's to mitigate this, to make this better, there's oftentimes you can give a child midazolam, like orally, like an oral suspension, like a liquid medication in the preoperative to make them a little more, not care about things. And I loved doing it. When I was a resident and I did pediatric anesthesia, one of my favorite things was to give kids midazolam and then just see them basically drunk. I mean, it's basically kids that they're acting drunk in it. For one thing, it's absolutely hilarious. And it just makes everything better. So that is an important thing to do, an important thing to offer. And then, in my opinion, an important thing to offer is to have the parents come back with the child, to be there while they go off to sleep. I think that is extremely important that their parent is there. And honestly, if my child were getting anesthetic, and this depends on hospital to hospital, right? This policy, I think it should be more widespread. I don't think it's universal. But if I were going to have surgery, if my child's going to have surgery at an institution, I was going to be like, can I come back while they go off to sleep? And they say, no, our policy is no. I would not have my child get surgery there. Absolutely not. I would go back with my daughter, have her sit in my arms while we put that mask on. Well, I put the mask on, right? I think allowing the parent to put the mask on is totally fine and safe for them to go off to sleep. Parents should go back with children. They should be there present. Again, this all leads back to what I'm talking about. We should create the best atmosphere possible for all patients when they have medical interventions, so they do not have trauma, so that they don't have obstacles to seeking medical care throughout their lives. I think it's very important. Now, when I have a little bit older children, I give them the option. Even a 12-year-old, 15-year-old. A lot of times, children that get surgery, they have a complex medical history, and they can have a very hard relationship with medicine to begin with, right? So, if a child has been through the medical system a lot through their lives, they can have a very complicated relationship. And so I will offer them, I'll be like, hey, do you want an IV? Because here's how I do this to every time. I treat them like they are sentient beings, which they are. Children can make their decisions with help, right? Allow them to make their own decisions. Because if they are part of the decision-making process, they're going to feel better about things. They're going to feel safer. They're going to feel more oriented, right? Involving them in the decision-making is extremely important, right? Any parent knows that, right? If you want your child to do something, you don't just say, hey, you got to take a bath. You say, hey, do you want to, we need to take a bath tonight, but we can do a bath, or we can go and clean your room, or we can do, give them options. So anyway, I give them options. I say, I say, we can either give you a poke with a needle right now, and then you're done. You'll go off to sleep with that. Or you can come back and kind of smell some stinky gas. I'm like, what do you prefer? What's worse for you? And kids, depending on the age, all the time, they'll pick the IV. And I will personally put in the IV because I want them to have good experience. Anyway, so that's very important. Just patient anxiety and addressing it and taking it serious and not dismissing it is extremely important for many reasons that I've outlined. All right, let's move on to a nonfiction book review. This book is called The Storm. Hang on, let me bring it. It's called The Storm Before the Calm: America's Discord, the Coming Crisis of the 2020s, and the Triumph Beyond by George Friedman. When was this published? 2020. It's about 250 pages. So in a nutshell, this book is trying to retrofit a narrative. And let me discuss that. So I read this book with skeptical interest, but found that it ultimately failed. Based on cherry-picking historical events, economic and social trends to force a narrative on the reader. And here's the narrative. That the U.S. goes through an 80-year cycle where the federal government's role changes, and a 50-year cycle of socioeconomic change. The author argues that these two major cycles will be changing over at the same time in 2028. And he predicts very ill-defined social and economic turmoil, but ultimately promises prosperity going forward. Now, I do not have a problem with someone coming up with a narrative to serve as a thought model. I think that's totally fine. That's why I had interest in reading this book. I think thought models like that to help you think about things and reduce problems, I think is great. This can be really useful, and I enjoyed hearing about it. I enjoyed reading about this narrative that this guy was saying. My issue is the just unflappable certainty that the writer believes these things will come to pass based on his own confirmation bias and endorsement of American exceptionalism, and basically just armchair speculation and moralizing. That's what he does in this book. The author starts off with an uneven historic account of the beginnings of the American Revolution, and then continues a narrative thread that helps support his hypothesis of these cycles of history. It's strange that major events that don't happen to coincide with his timed cycles, this 80-year and 50-year cycle, aren't, according to him, they aren't the heralding of a new cycle. One would think that 9/11 might be the beginning of a new federal government cycle, or a socioeconomic cycle. Or how about the 2007-2008 financial crash? That might be the beginning or the ending of a socioeconomic cycle. But maybe not. I don't know. You can argue these things. I'm just saying he cherry picks what he decides is the beginning and the ending of a cycle, right? He thinks the last federal cycle began with the New Deal era and FDR, and the last socioeconomic cycle changed over in the 1970s. So I do think Friedman understands pretty well the major forces that drive American institutions and politics, and he can give a fairly balanced analysis during many portions of the book. But the author's true opinions show with how much he loathes liberal technocracy. He states that since World War II, we have been in the age of Ivy League technocrats who rule as these blubbering, complex, and siloed entities, and they don't communicate with one another and are failing under their own bureaucracy. He casts technocrats as the dominant force and authority that drives federal institutions. While I think he makes a lot of sense. I don't argue that point. I think he makes a lot of sense complaining about the overwrought and out of touch technocrats. He gives them way too much emphasis and leaves out the more important problem: state and corporate collusion. It's bizarre that the author doesn't even mention how enmeshed the corporatocracy is with the state and federal government and regulation agencies. I mean, he doesn't mention it once. Rather than living under the reign of technocrats, we're actually living in the age of minimal regulation, where federal rule has become incredibly impotent. He doesn't recognize this at all. He does a good job recognizing the unwanted and corrosive effects of concentrated wealth, but not once does he discuss how this influences the function of the federal government. The author does not once mention Citizens United, one of probably the worst ruling, well, I don't know about that, a ruling that has fundamentally changed our democracy. He doesn't mention lobbying or regulatory capture. And he's simply wrong about the tyranny of technocrats, and he lost a lot of credibility with me. He also makes the same tired and false arguments about GSEs, government-sponsored entities like Fannie, that they're responsible for the 2008 financial crash when the lion's share of the bubble was clearly unregulated, private, predatory, and subprime loans thrown into mortgage-backed securities. The GSEs were a tiny share of that market. They did not cause the financial. I cannot believe how much I have to explain this to people. Government policy did not cause the 2008 financial crash. The vast majority were private subprime loans. They were predatory loans, and they were thrown into mortgage-backed securities. That caused it was not government it wasn't GSE loans. Anyway, this is all just further evidence that the problem is not just technocrats; it's unfettered markets. He also cast the U.S. as like a reluctant empire, which is a pretty gentle analysis of a country intentionally at war its entire existence with the abject goal of global hegemonic control. The United States is not a reluctant empire. It is a very deliberate empire, in my opinion. Obviously. Anyway, okay. Here's the big issue with this book. The solutions, okay? He literally says we just need people with, quote, common sense without qualifying that at all. I'm sorry, but that's not a solution. That's just him complaining about, like, I don't know what, he does not talk about what common sense, common sense is highly subjective. I'm baffled. This is the foundation of his solutions, that we need people in government with, quote, common sense. When it comes to climate change, he basically says, I'm paraphrasing, but this is what it basically says. I'm pretty sure it's happening, but I don't know what to do about it, so I won't include it in my prediction model. Okay. And here's the kicker about a solution for demographic collapse, which is the dropping fertility rates and aging population. This is what he says. I'm not joking at all. He literally says older people shouldn't be allowed to vote in the future. That is bonkers. What is he talking about? You can't bar people from voting based on their age. What is he talking about? So not only does this author not have a crystal ball, I don't think his predictions will come to pass. He's not even correctly diagnosing our current modern problems. Anyway, I don't recommend this book. It's called The Storm Before the Calm by George Friedman. Don't read it. I read it, so you don't have to. All right, let's go on to some questions here. Here's a question from TikTok from Jefferson S. Raskin. I'm coming up on 4 years in anesthesia. I guess they're a resident. And I still can't get my monitor cables from getting tangled together by the end of the case. Any suggestions? Just cope. It's hard. So what this person's talking about is, in anesthesia we have a lot of cables that go to the patient that monitor, right? We don't really have anything that's wireless. EKG monitor and pulse ox probe and blood pressure cuff, and there's more things that we can put up to a patient, IV cables. And then if you're in cardiac anesthesia, these even more things like a swan line into the neck, lots of stuff like that. How do you keep it straight? I don't really have a perfect solution for you. Here's one thing. When you flip someone that goes prone, when you flip someone to prone, or you move them over to another bed or something like that, sometimes it's better to just completely disconnect all of the cables and then move them and reconnect them. I do that when I have prone patients. It's way, way easier to keep the cables straight. But honestly, this is just something you just have to deal with. I really don't have advice. This is just an inherent issue with anesthesia, is keeping all those cables. And it's important. This isn't an OCD thing. I do not have OCD, but I do in the OR, and you should. If you work in an OR, you should be OCD. You should be very obsessive about all the details. And this is an important point. Having cables tangled, this can get in the way of like providing quick care. Like, where is the IV? Oh, I need to give him medication real quick. Where is this cable? Is it hooked up properly? Like, having things organized is extremely important, and knowing where things are. But I don't know. You just got to come up with your own thing. Have a standard where you think this cable is, where that cable is for particular patients. I don't know. That's all I got for you. That's a hard question to answer. I don't have a solution for you. All right, one more question. This is from CJ Minor. This is on TikTok. What keeps you going every day? So I'm a lucky person. I'm a person that is not prone to depression or other mental illness in the face of hard things going on. I think I won the genetic lottery, and I don't have any childhood trauma, right? I have good parents. I don't have any trauma in my life. Not really. And I have a really amazing supportive wife, and I have an amazing little girl. Obviously, that's what keeps me going. My daughter is the most amazing thing ever. I love her to death. I think about her constantly. I miss her at work all the time. I love coming home and I spend every waking moment with her. Obviously those things keep me going. That's basically it, right? My answer doesn't have to go anywhere beyond that. But writing keeps me going. I love writing fiction. If you've listened to my other podcasts, I love writing fiction. I love writing. I don't write every day, but most days I write a little bit here and there. Absolutely love it. I love reading. Reading keeps me going. Reading nonfiction, reading fiction, sci-fi and fantasy absolutely keeps me going. And then video games. I love video games. Right now, me and my wife have been playing Hogwarts Legacy, and it is so fun. It is so awesome. And yes, I've separated the art from the artist in this case. I don't think boycotting does anything, by the way. If you want my opinion on that, unorganized boycott does nothing. I think it's pointless. Anyway, there you go. There you have it. Okay, for those of you, I'm done with the podcast. For those that are not interested I'm gonna do a fantasy book review, and then we'll be done. So if you don't care about fantasy, you can have a good day. Thanks for listening. For those that care, let's do one more book review real quick, and then we'll get out of here. All right, I'm gonna review. It's an indie book. It's by an indie publisher. I think, or indie author. I think he's German. I'm friendly with him on Twitter. This book is called Dreams of Dying. It's by Nicholas Lietzau. Last name is spelled Litzau. Dreams of Dying. This was published in October 2020. It's 728 pages. This book you've never read anything like this. It's got vivid world building, complex characterization, and really amazing social commentary. I was made aware of this book from one of my favorite book reviewers, Patrick Leo, who, if you're into fantasy, you've probably heard of him. He's a book reviewer who I'm also friendly with in Indonesia. He's reviewed one of my books called my book Dark Theory. I asked him a while ago if he would review it, and he obliged me. Anyway, he's an awesome guy, really outstanding guy. You should follow him, Patrick Leo, Petrik Leo Leo. Anyway, so I was made aware of this book by him, and he mentioned it as one of the best books he's ever read. So needless to say, I picked this up pretty quick. And I'm glad I did, because I found a really well-written indie book with great pacing, haunting atmosphere, dynamic world building, and really complex characters. A bonus was finding provocative commentary about capitalism and like wealth disparity and the dubious virtues of rugged individualism. I want to emphasize that this is not the focus of the book, and this book is not just like some contrived thing, negative polemic against capitalism. It's not what this book is. This book is about the characters. It's about the world. So first, with the world building, it was just delightful. It was awesome. This book takes place on an archipelago built upon the labor of a proletariat class, working and toiling under the fist of a cabal of magnates. That's kind of the setting. On top of onerous taxes and terrible public policies designed to create even more agitation from the labor class, the people are exposed to environmental hazards and toxic chemicals with no access to healthcare. Sounds kind of familiar. There is a kind of mental magic system that has to do with different dimensions. While some of the details of this were explained, it still remained unclear to me, which I didn't mind too much. I thought the author pulled it off pretty well. The characters are fantastic. There's a character, Jespa and Lycia and Kuwa, and they're really well fleshed out. The romances are not straightforward. They're messy. Things get messy really fast, and they get even more complicated by the end of the book. Do not expect classic character arcs here. The author does a good job of keeping these characters very real. Jesper is his name, in particular, is a difficult character. What I mean is, he has a really tragic past, which fills him with self-doubt and makes him quite unstable. He is engrossing, frustrating, and also a tragic character. A huge component of this book is how someone struggles with mental health, and maybe more importantly, how one copes with depression knowing that there are no tangible solutions. The author put a lot of care into handling this, and I must say he did it a really beautiful job. I think this book will relate with and legitimately help with a lot of people who struggle with similar problems. The overall plot was awesome. I love the twists and turns of the story, and the dream sequences were so creepy. Man. The author definitely took a couple pages from the screenplay of Inception, but it's fine. I didn't care. It was really fun to read. I'm a big fan of the ultimate message and philosophy of this book, which is ideology is destructive. Pragmatism is the only solution that results in change. This message really resonated with me. If you know anything about me, I always talk about how ideology is bad. that we should not anchor ourselves to ideology. That's how we get manipulated. I've never read a book like this. I highly recommend it to any fantasy fan, but any lover of good fiction. I'm looking forward to reading more from the author. And by the way, it's based on some game that I'm totally unfamiliar with, like the world, and it didn't affect my enjoyment of the book. You don't need, if you look up this book and you're like, oh, it's based on this world, some game, I have no idea what that game is, and it doesn't matter. You don't need to know. So it's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's called Dreams of Dying by Nicholas Lietzau, Litzau. Highly recommend it. Go out and pick it up and support an indie author who's a really nice guy. All right. That's all I got for you. Email me at icudoctorecmo@gmail.com. Please email me with ideas for topics, because as I said at the beginning of this, the reason I don't always do podcasts is because I get bored with myself. I'm literally sitting in my car in a parking lot right now. It's not. Sometimes I just don't have the motivation to just talk to myself into a microphone. And I don't think sometimes I just really have that much to say. If you give me ideas and topics, and I'm like, ooh, I'll do that. That'll force me to do a podcast. And also, all of you that you nudge me on TikTok, I see your comments. You're like, hey, are you going to do a podcast soon? That does make me do a podcast. It makes me feel guilty. So do that. Guilt me on TikTok, because it does that's why I did this one. Because someone a few days ago was like, hey, just a friendly reminder that you have a podcast. And I was like, oh yeah. So you can do that. You can bug me there. And then I'm on Instagram, which is just I just mirror the content from TikTok. It's ICU Doctor TikTok. It's the same stuff on TikTok. You don't need to follow me on Instagram if you follow me on TikTok. I literally put up the same content because I do not have the time and energy to create content specific for social media. I am not a social media person. I have no idea what I'm doing with social media. Anyway, whatever. All right. That's all I got for you. Thanks.